In our last segment, I mentioned a critical solution to our issues of government overreach, changing our status education system. In this segment, I want to discuss another avenue to save our republic. That is constitutional amendments. Let me first start with Joseph Story's solution for federal overreach. In his commentaries on the Constitution, after he discusses removing those abusing the Constitution through elections and impeachment of presidents and judges, Story goes on to talk of the worst case scenario which we are in today. He states, "But in the next place, and it is that which would furnish a case of most difficulty and danger, though it may fairly be presumed to be of rare occurrence, if the legislature, executive, and judicial department should all concur in gross usurpation, there is still a peaceable remedy provided by the Constitution. It is by the power of amendment, which may always be applied at the will of 3/4 of the states." That is where we are today. All three branches are conspiring against the Constitution. So we the people must act through amendments. Story continues, "And the general right of a society in other cases to change the government at the will of a majority of the whole people in any manner that may suit its pleasures is undisputed and seems indisputable. Nor should it ever be lost sight of that the government of the United States is one of limited and enumerated powers, and that a departure from the true import and sense of its powers is, pro tanto, the establishment of a new Constitution. Congress, presidents, and the courts have been and continue to establish a new Constitution every time they violate our Constitution. So what's our remedy? It is in Article 5 of the Constitution, and it allows for a convention of states to propose amendments to bypass Congress and the federal government. First, let me ask the question, is the Constitution the problem? No. The Constitution is interpreted and perverted or ignored by the Supreme Court, Congress, and the executive is the problem. The current prevailing interpretation is a violation of original intent, which allows virtually all the problems we face today. What's the better approach? We have some options. We could continue to try to elect good people who obey the original intent of the Constitution. How's that been working? Not well at all. Any good ones we get can't do much. Or we could hope the judiciary is faithful to the original intent of the Constitution. That hasn't worked well either. The left dominates the courts, and even the so-called conservative Supreme Court hasn't given us much help. Or we could amend the Constitution to prevent abuse. I believe that is the only viable option. You may ask, and this is one valid objection to the Convention of States, if they're not following the Constitution now, why would they follow it even if we amend it? Let me answer by posing a question. Why didn't Obama run for a third term as president? Now, you might say that the Constitution doesn't allow it, which is correct. But Obama violated the Constitution in many ways. Why didn't he just do it again? The answer is simple. Because the Constitution is so clear on the issue in the 22nd Amendment that he couldn't get around it. The federal government right now is operating per the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court and precedents from previous Congresses, using clauses that seem vague in today's vernacular. Since these clauses seem vague and very few understand their original meaning, the left is able to twist the words to suit their purposes. Of course, they have also dumbed down our schools so that almost nobody knows the original meaning. Properly written amendments can leave no doubt about the proper limited role of the national government. Our founder's solution is in Article 5. It provides, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. You can see that the Constitution allows two methods of amendment, one by Congress and the other by the states. Well, all the previous amendments have been started in Congress. But why two methods? Towards the end of the Constitutional Convention, George Mason objected that the only method of amending the Constitution up to that point in the process relied on Congress. George Mason said, amendments therefore will be necessary, and it will be better to provide for them in an easy, regular, and constitutional way than to trust to chance and violence. It would be improper to require the consent of the national legislature because they may abuse their power and refuse their consent on that very account. Mason also said that without a way for the states to bypass Congress, no amendments of the proper kind would ever be attained by the people if the government should become oppressive. The convention delegates agreed with Mason and added the clause for states to call a convention. Later, James Madison explained the concept. He said, should the provisions of the Constitution as here reviewed be found not to secure the government and rights of the states against usurpations and abuses on the part of the United States, the final resort within the purview of the Constitution lies in an amendment of the Constitution according to a process applicable by the states. Today, a convention of states is the only realistic way to curb the abuses of the federal government. Congress is not going to propose amendments that curtail their own power. The states must do it. There are several groups advocating for a convention of states with various proposals. Some exclusively for a specific amendment, like the Balanced Budget Amendment, and also one for a Term Limits Amendment. Those single amendments sound good on the surface, but could lead to bigger problems. For example, a Balanced Budget Amendment could lead to higher taxes if some sort of other check on spending wasn't put in place. We need a set of comprehensive amendments to address all the abuses of power. I think the best proposal out there is from the Convention of States Project. This organization's proposal for a convention reads as follows. A convention of states will be called to impose physical restraints on the federal government, limit the power, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. So how would a convention of states work? One of the complaints against the convention from some conservatives is that the Constitution doesn't say anything about how a convention of states would work. Therefore, they say it would be hijacked. Since the founders didn't give explicit instruction in the Constitution, we have to go by the historical record to see what they meant. I don't have time to get into details, but there is ample evidence from the many conventions held before and after the Constitution was ratified that give us the details. Here's how it would work. First, 2/3 of the states, meaning 34 states today, submit applications for the same issue, per Article 5. A court decision has ruled that all needed applications must be for the same thing, so they all have to stay the same thing. Second, Congress is required to call the convention, and that's described in Federalist 85. Third, Congress's only discretion is the time and place of the convention. Fourth, commissioners or delegates who are appointed and controlled by the state legislators debate, propose, and vote upon possible amendments. Fifth, each state gets one vote during the final process of proposing amendments. One state, one vote. Six, proposed amendments are sent back to the states for ratification in either the legislatures or state conventions. And that's chosen by Congress per Article 5. Seventh, if 3/4 of the states ratify, that's 38 today, the proposed amendment or amendments become part of the Constitution. Individual amendments are ratified separately. Some may pass and others may fail to pass. So that's how it would work. So I want to address some of the arguments against the convention. The left has done a good job at throwing out a red herring, convincing some conservatives that a convention of states is a constitutional convention, or CONCON, and that there is a potential for a runaway convention that would destroy or rewrite our Constitution. Nothing could be further from the truth. As per Article 5, the sole purpose of the convention is to amend the Constitution. It could not propose a new Constitution any more than Congress could, since they are mentioned in the very same sentence. Some say that because Article 5 says that Congress calls the convention, that therefore Congress has complete control. This is ignorant of the historical context of the word call. What is meant by the founders is that Congress would set the time and place, and that's all. Why would the founders present a way to bypass Congress and then give Congress control over it? Mainly, the arguments against the Convention of States center on the fact that the left will again violate the rule of law and do whatever they want. Well, they're doing that right now. So does that mean that because they violate the rule of law, we shouldn't use the rule of law to protect ourselves? We should just wait and hope that eventually they don't violate the rule of law? That's not going to work. So what type of amendments could be proposed by the Constitution? Well, per the application for the Convention of States, anything that limits the power of the federal government could be proposed. Amendments to strictly define the general welfare and the Commerce Clause would be high on my list. An amendment to outlaw abortion, amendments to ensure the courts don't rule the land, amendments to spell out all the entitlement programs are not allowed and must be phased out, repeal the 16th and 17th Amendment, to name a few. The list could be long. Remember though, even if an amendment is proposed that we conservatives don't like, it will still take 38 states to ratify it for it to become part of the Constitution, which, given the current makeup of the state legislatures, would be next to impossible. As of the summer of 2023, 31 state legislatures are controlled by Republicans, 17 are controlled by Democrats, and 2 are split. Remember also that the governors don't count because they have no say according to the Constitution. And really, this is not just a Republican issue. Many Democrats are tired of all the federal control and would be in favor of a convention of states. Where's the process now? In the summer of 2023? The application by the Convention of States project has passed in 19 states, Tennessee being the 5th state to pass it. It is currently before the legislature of 22 more states. This organization just completed a mock Convention of States to show the country how it would work. During that mock convention, 6 amendments were passed. Term limits for Congress, a cap on U.S. Supreme Court judges at 9 and a quorum at 6, a balanced budget amendment, set boundaries to the Commerce Clause, also to enable states to overrule federal laws and regulations, and to stop the federal government from seizing states' lands and resources. Of course, that doesn't mean that these same amendments would be passed in a real convention, but whatever amendments might be passed, it's a high bar. 34 states must call for a convention, and 38 states must ratify any proposed amendments. The odds aren't great, but it is possible, and we must work diligently for it. Our only other options are either to bow to tyranny or armed revolt. I don't want either of those. For more information, go to theconventionofstates.com. By the way, it is the largest grassroots organization in America.